Some secrets you hide out of fear, but others you sharpen into blades. My parents always mocked me as a 38-year-old failed accountant. When my grandmother died and left me $4.7 million, they dragged me to court to steal every penny. They thought crushing me would be easy. They had no idea they were stepping into a federal trap, and the one holding the handcuffs was the daughter they despised. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Melody Rogers, and I am 38 years old. February in Chicago does not merely bring cold weather, it brings a biting, relentless freeze that sinks deep into your bones and stays there. The cemetery in the city's outer suburbs was a desolate expanse of white, violently whipped by a blizzard that seemed determined to erase everything in its path. I stood about 20 feet away from the main gathering, my black wool coat pulled tight against the howling wind. Through the thick curtain of falling snow, I watched the polished mahogany casket of my grandmother, Eleanor, slowly descend into the frozen earth. The weather was bitter, but it was nothing compared to the chilling atmosphere radiating from the small group huddled near the grave. Chief among them were my parents, Harrison and Beatrice Rogers. If you did not know this was a funeral, you would easily mistake their appearance for attendance at an upscale corporate gala. Harrison stood tall in a pristine, tailored cashmere overcoat that cost more than my first car. His head was bowed, not in mourning, but because his eyes were glued to the glowing screen of his smartphone, his thumb swiping relentlessly as he monitored the real-time fluctuations of the stock market. Beside him, Beatrice was practically vibrating with irritation. She shifted her weight from side to side, glaring down at her custom Italian leather boots, visibly furious that the slush and salt were ruining the expensive finish. Neither of them shed a single tear. Their faces were tight masks of inconvenience, waiting for the obligatory clock to run out so they could return to their gilded lives. Standing there in the snow, I felt a deep, twisting ache in my chest. For the past 5 years, my parents had not visited Eleanor a single time. They claimed they were too busy building their empire, too consumed by board meetings and international flights to drive to the suburbs. In reality, they simply had no use for an old woman who no longer served their ambitions. But while they ignored her existence, I made the drive. Every single weekend for 5 long years, I drove 3 hours back and forth just to sit at her heavy oak dining table. Those weekends were our sanctuary. Eleanor and I shared a secret passion that Harrison and Beatrice would have scoffed at: restoring antique pocket watches. We would spend entire Saturday afternoons surrounded by magnifying glasses, tiny brass tweezers, and the sharp scent of metal polish. It was meticulous, quiet work. We breathed life back into forgotten mechanisms, making dead hearts tick once more. Eleanor was sharp until her very last day. She saw right through the polished veneer my parents presented to the world. I remember one specific afternoon, the sunlight streaming through the frosted window as I struggled to align a microscopic gear. Eleanor placed her warm, wrinkled hand over mine. "Do not let them make you feel small, Melody," she had said, her voice steady and clear. "Harrison and Beatrice, they only see the surface of the watch. They care about the shiny gold casing and how much it is worth to other people. But you are the only one who understands how the gears work. You know how to take things apart and put them back together. That makes you the master of the time, not them." Her words echoed in my mind as the priest delivered his final muffled blessing over the howling wind. The ceremony concluded with a heavy final thud of frozen dirt hitting the top of the casket. The crowd immediately began to scatter, eager to escape the storm. Harrison slipped his phone into his pocket and finally looked up. He adjusted his expensive scarf and strode over to where I was standing. He did not offer a hug. Instead, he gave my shoulder a hollow, obligatory pat that felt more like a dismissal. "See the lawyer next week, Miss Accountant," Harrison muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind but dripping with unmistakable condescension. "Do not make a mess of her paperwork. We want this sorted out quickly." He turned on his heel and walked away, his arm slipping through Beatrice's as they hurried toward their waiting town car. I did not say a word in response. I simply shoved my freezing hand deep into the pocket of my coat. My fingers curled tightly around the cool, smooth brass casing of an antique pocket watch. I felt the steady, rhythmic ticking against my palm. The gears were turning. 2 days later, the scene shifted to a completely different world. The sprawling corner office of the family estate attorney in downtown Chicago smelled heavily of polished oak, aged leather, and unspoken greed. The room was designed to intimidate, featuring floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with dense legal volumes and an expansive, commanding view of the city skyline. I sat quietly in a heavy leather armchair, holding a delicate porcelain cup of black coffee that the receptionist had offered me. Across from me sat Harrison and Beatrice. They had shed their somber funeral attire for high-end corporate armor. Harrison wore a sharp charcoal suit, his legs crossed at the knee, his expensive leather shoe tapping a restless, impatient rhythm against the Persian rug. He kept checking his platinum wristwatch, exuding the air of a man whose time was vastly more valuable than anyone else's in the room. Beatrice sat beside him, draped in a designer silk blouse, casually inspecting her perfectly manicured fingernails. They did not speak to me. They did not even look at me. To them, I was merely a clerical necessity, a required body in the room before the real business of wealth transfer could begin. They were practically vibrating with anticipation, already mentally dividing the spoils of a mother they had ignored for half a decade. The attorney, an older man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, sat behind his massive mahogany desk. He cleared his throat, adjusting a thick manila folder in front of him. The dry rustle of paper was the only sound in the suffocating silence of the room. "We are here to execute the final will and testament of Eleanor Rogers," the lawyer began, his voice dry and clinical. Harrison leaned forward, a hungry, predatory gleam flashing in his eyes. Beatrice stopped inspecting her nails, her posture instantly straightening. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading the dense legal jargon. For the first few minutes, it was standard boilerplate language. Then, he reached the section regarding the distribution of assets. He paused, taking a slow breath before reading the final clauses. "The totality of the estate," the lawyer read, emphasizing each syllable, "which includes various liquid trusts, mutual funds, and prime real estate holdings, is currently valued at approximately $4.7 million. Harrison offered a smug, satisfied smirk to his wife. Beatrice let out a soft, pleased sigh, already spending the fortune in her mind. "And," the lawyer continued, raising his eyes from the document to look directly at my parents, "per Eleanor's explicit, legally notarized instructions, this entire sum of $4.7 million is to be transferred, in its entirety, to her granddaughter, Melody Rogers. Furthermore, the deceased explicitly stated that her son, Harrison Rogers, and his wife, Beatrice, are to receive absolutely nothing." The atmosphere in the room did not just shift. It violently shattered. The smugness evaporated from Harrison's face, replaced instantly by a pale, shocked mask. For 3 long seconds, absolutely nobody breathed. Then the explosion came. Harrison slammed both of his hands down onto the polished oak desk with a deafening crack. He leaped to his feet, his chair violently rolling backward and crashing into a bookshelf. His face turned a deep, furious shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff white collar. "Are you out of your mind?" Harrison screamed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed an accusing finger at the attorney, then at me. "That old woman was completely senile. She did not know what she was doing. This pathetic, cheap little accountant has been whispering in her ear for years, brainwashing her, manipulating an incapacitated woman. The lawyer remained calm, holding up a placating hand. Mr. Rogers, I assure you, your mother was evaluated by 2 independent medical professionals on the day she signed this updated document. She was found to be in complete possession of her mental faculties. Beatrice stood up next. The aristocratic composure she had carefully maintained vanished, revealing the vicious reality beneath. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits that practically radiated venom. Her voice dropped to a low, lethal hiss. "You have no husband. You have no career," Beatrice sneered, stepping closer so I could smell the sharp, expensive perfume she wore. "You are nothing but a ghost in this family, a failure who has achieved nothing. You think you can steal what rightfully belongs to us? We will take you to court. We will drag you through the mud, bankrupt you with legal fees, and make sure you end up living out on the street. You will not see a single dime of that money." The room vibrated with their uncontrollable rage. They expected me to shrink back. They expected the quiet, passive 38-year-old failure to burst into tears, to cower under the immense pressure of their power and wealth. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I slowly brought the porcelain cup to my lips and took a deliberate, calm sip of the lukewarm black coffee. The bitter taste grounded me. I placed the cup gently onto the saucer, the soft clinking sound echoing loudly in the tense, hostile silence. I stood up, smoothing the front of my simple blazer. I looked directly into Beatrice's furious eyes, and then shifted my gaze to Harrison's red, sweating face. I felt my pulse, slow and steady, perfectly matching the silent ticking of the pocket watch I carried in my mind. "Do whatever you think is right," I said quietly. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the heavy oak doors, leaving them choking on their own fury. I walked out of the building and stepped onto the busy Chicago street. As I merged into the crowd of pedestrians, I mentally started the timer. The countdown had officially begun. 3 days later, right on schedule, a heavy knock echoed through my apartment. I opened the front door to find a solemn-looking process server standing on the welcome mat. He handed me a thick stack of legal documents. I thanked him politely and closed the door. Tossing the papers onto my kitchen island, I glanced at the first page. It was a formal subpoena. My parents had officially filed a massive civil lawsuit against me. The charges printed in bold black ink were exactly what I had anticipated: severe fraud, extreme psychological manipulation of an elderly individual, and the falsification of binding financial records. They had taken the bait perfectly. Thank you for listening to this part of the story. If you want to see how I dismantle their lives, please subscribe to Revenge Stories and stay tuned for the next episode. I tossed the heavy stack of legal documents onto my kitchen island. To Harrison and Beatrice, that subpoena was a weapon meant to break me. To me, it was an invitation. I walked past my modest living room and entered the small, windowless space I used as a home office. I ignored the standard, cheap desktop computer sitting on the desk. Instead, I reached underneath the hardwood floorboards, popped a concealed latch, and pulled out a heavy matte black briefcase. Inside rested a federal-issued military-grade encrypted laptop. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The screen flared to life, glowing with a cold blue light, demanding a 16-character alphanumeric passcode, followed by a rotating cryptographic token from a separate device. I typed it in flawlessly. The Bureau of Sovereign Financial Defense, or the BSFD, does not exist in standard government phone directories. We do not hold press conferences, and we do not have public relations officers. We are a specialized, highly classified division operating deep under the umbrella of the federal government, tasked with hunting and dismantling international money laundering syndicates, terror financing rings, and corporate fraud at the absolute highest levels. My parents fully believed I was a freelance tax preparer who scraped by on minimum wage and clipped grocery coupons. In reality, I am the lead forensic financial investigator for the BSFD, I hunt ghosts within the global financial system, and I am exceptionally lethal at my job. I opened a new, highly secured digital dossier on my encrypted drive. I titled it Project Defective Gear. My parents and their lawyer expected me to spend the next few weeks crying, scrambling to find medical records and character witnesses to prove Eleanor was of sound mind. They wanted me on the defensive, reacting to their attacks. But in the world of high-stakes financial warfare, playing defense is a guaranteed way to lose. I was not going to investigate my grandmother. I was going to dissect the entire existence of my parents. I patched into the federal surveillance mainframe, utilizing my Level 5 clearance to bypass standard banking privacy firewalls. To the untrained eye, a financial ledger is just a boring wall of numbers. But to me, a ledger is a living, breathing ecosystem. You can see sheer panic in a sudden, massive transfer of funds at 3 a.m. You can see arrogance and greed in the fractional skimming of corporate offshore accounts. I started with Harrison Rogers. On paper, his logistics and import company was thriving, showing steady quarterly growth and massive revenue streams. But when you know how to look beneath the polished surface, the numbers always confess the truth. I deployed an algorithmic tracing program to follow the money flowing out of his corporate accounts, bypassing the dummy corporations he set up in Delaware. It took less than 3 hours for the illusion of his wealth to completely shatter. Harrison was not a successful, untouchable businessman. He was a desperate, drowning man grasping at straws. 2 years ago, he had quietly funneled massive amounts of company funds into a highly volatile, unregulated cryptocurrency scheme based out of Eastern Europe. The market had violently collapsed, leaving him with a staggering, inescapable debt of $3.5 million. He had been illegally borrowing against non-existent corporate assets just to keep the lights on and maintain his lavish lifestyle. Worse, his primary shell company was already flagged by a secondary international sweep for suspicious routing activities. He was bleeding cash from every pore, and Eleanor's $4.7 million was not just a convenient windfall. It was his absolute last lifeline to avoid federal prison. But Harrison was not smart enough to build a complex corporate laundering structure on his own. He lacked the technical discipline. He needed an architect. I shifted my focus to the man who had sat in that downtown office radiating pure arrogance, Marcus Thorne, a flashy civil litigation attorney with a penchant for custom Italian suits and aggressive courtroom theatrics. Why would a high-rolling lawyer like him take on a relatively simple family estate dispute? The math simply did not add up. I initiated a deep web trace on Thorne's personal and professional financial routing numbers. I cross-referenced the metadata from the seemingly innocent emails between Thorne and Harrison, stripping away the encrypted digital layers. There it was, the absolute smoking gun. Buried within a labyrinth of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, hidden behind 3 different proxy servers, I found a massive joint holding account. The authorized signatories on that hidden account were Harrison Rogers and Marcus Thorne. Thorne was not just their legal counsel for a civil dispute. He was their silent partner in a sophisticated money laundering operation. He was waiting to take his massive cut of my grandmother's estate to wash their dirty crypto debts clean through his firm's trust accounts. For the next 48 hours, I did not sleep. I lived on black coffee and the cold, sharp adrenaline of the hunt. I meticulously downloaded every single wire transfer, every flagged email, every hidden crypto ledger, and every fraudulent invoice. I mapped out the entire conspiracy on a digital web, drawing undeniable red lines connecting my father's desperate debts, Thorne's illegal offshore accounts, and the fraudulent lawsuit they had just filed against me. I compiled the raw data into a physical, undeniable stack of evidence, printing the documents on secure paper. Normally, a defendant facing a multi-million-dollar civil fraud case would immediately panic and hire the best, most expensive defense attorney they could afford. But I was not going to hire anyone. Bringing an outside lawyer would only tip them off and keep the battle within the safe, predictable rules of civil court. I was going to represent myself. I would walk into that courtroom completely alone, armed with nothing but a thin leather briefcase and my own mind. My parents and their arrogant lawyer believed they were dragging a helpless, weak sheep into the slaughterhouse. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with a federal apex predator. The trap was set, the evidence was locked, and the gears were perfectly aligned. If you are enjoying this story and want to see exactly how this courtroom battle unfolds, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories so you never miss an episode. Monday morning arrived with a bleak gray sky hanging heavy over the district court. I walked through the towering wooden doors of courtroom number 4. The room was grand and imposing, lined with dark walnut paneling and filled with the stale scent of old paper and nervous sweat. I carried nothing but a simple, slim black leather portfolio. No rolling boxes of files. No paralegals trailing nervously behind me. No legal team. Marcus Thorne was already there, holding court at the plaintiff's table. He wore a custom-tailored navy blue suit with a silk tie that practically screamed billable hours. He spotted me walking down the aisle, his eyes immediately dropping to my nearly empty hands. A greasy, condescending smile stretched across his face, revealing perfectly whitened teeth. As I walked past his table to take my seat at the lonely defense desk, he leaned in close so only I could hear. "Let us see if you can even last until the lunch break, little girl," Thorne whispered, his breath smelling faintly of expensive mints. I did not break my stride. I did not glare at him. I simply placed my portfolio gently onto the hard wooden surface of my desk and took a seat, my posture perfectly straight. The proceedings began precisely at 9 o'clock, and Thorne immediately launched into his highly rehearsed theatrical performance. He treated the courtroom like a Broadway stage, and he had cast my parents in the leading roles. He called them to the witness stand one by one to testify under oath. Harrison went first. He had completely dropped his arrogant, untouchable corporate persona. Instead, he adopted the slumped posture of a weary, heartbroken son. He spoke softly into the microphone, his voice trembling with manufactured grief at just the right moments. He painted a tragic, elaborate picture of a loving family brutally torn apart by a greedy, manipulative daughter. He claimed he had tried to call his mother every single week, but that I had somehow disconnected her phone lines and hidden her away. Beatrice followed him to the stand, and her performance was truly worthy of an Academy Award. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief, squeezing out a few highly calculated fake tears. Her voice hitched as she recounted entirely fictional stories of how she had driven to the suburbs with baked goods and flowers, only to find the doors locked and the curtains drawn by my command. She looked at the judge with wide, sorrowful eyes, calling me a parasite who had preyed upon a helpless, fading mind. Next, Thorne brought out his star witness, a so-called forensic financial expert he had undoubtedly paid a massive retaining fee to secure. The man dragged a heavy whiteboard to the center of the room, displaying a series of brightly colored, obnoxiously complex bar graphs and pie charts. With absolute, unwavering confidence, he spent 45 minutes explaining a completely fabricated financial narrative. He pointed at the charts with a laser pointer, claiming I had utilized aggressive, predatory accounting tactics to deliberately scramble Eleanor's investment portfolios. He threw around buzzwords like phantom liabilities and tax obfuscation techniques to sound intimidating. He confidently asserted to the judge that the sheer complexity of the ledgers proved I had created a dizzying maze of numbers designed solely to overwhelm an elderly mind, tricking a frail, senile woman into signing away her entire estate without understanding what she was doing. It was a spectacular, breathtaking display of absolute garbage. The brilliance of their legal strategy relied entirely on my reaction. They expected me to jump out of my seat in a blind panic. They wanted me to object frantically, to shout that they were lying, and to stumble over my own words trying to defend myself against the overwhelming wave of accusations. But I gave them absolutely nothing. I sat perfectly still, letting them dig their graves deeper with every single word they spoke under oath. Every lie was a documented count of perjury. After Harrison's agonizingly fake testimony, the judge, a stern woman with a sharp, unforgiving gaze, looked down at me from the high bench. "Does the defense wish to cross-examine the witness?" the judge asked, her tone neutral. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands resting gently on the edge of my desk. "No questions, Your Honor," I replied evenly. After Beatrice finished her tearful soliloquy and stepped down, the judge asked again. "No questions, Your Honor," I repeated, my voice perfectly calm and steady. When the fake financial expert finally concluded his ridiculous presentation, leaving his absurd charts on full display for the court to see, the judge offered me one last chance. She leaned forward, clearly puzzled by my total lack of self-preservation. "Miss Rogers, do you have any questions for this expert witness regarding these financial claims?" the judge asked, raising a single eyebrow. I met the judge's eyes, offering a polite, brief nod. "No questions, Your Honor. None at all." A quiet murmur of disbelief rippled through the small gallery sitting behind me. At the plaintiff's table, the atmosphere was incredibly jubilant. Harrison leaned back comfortably in his heavy oak chair, shooting me a triumphant, mocking half-smile. In his mind, the $4.7 million was already sitting safely in his offshore bank account, solving all of his massive debts. Beatrice let out a long, dramatic sigh of relief, reaching over to pat Thorne's arm affectionately. Thorne himself was practically glowing with pure, unadulterated self-satisfaction. He buttoned his expensive navy suit jacket, puffed out his chest proudly, and addressed the court with a booming, arrogant authority that echoed off the high ceiling. "Your Honor," Thorne declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty and impending victory, "the plaintiff rests its case." He sat down heavily, grinning from ear to ear, expecting the judge to immediately rule in his favor and put an end to this pathetic charade. They had built a perfect, impenetrable wall of lies. They had no idea I held the detonator. The judge shifted her gaze from the plaintiff's table down to me. "Miss Rogers," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the large, tense room, "it is now your turn. The defense may call its first witness or present its opening statement." I stood up. I did not rush. I picked up my slim black leather portfolio from the desk. I walked out from behind the defense table and moved to the center of the room. I felt the eyes of everyone burning into my back. Harrison was practically vibrating with smug satisfaction, his arms resting heavily on the table. Beatrice had a cold, victorious smirk plastered across her perfectly made-up face. Thorne was leaning back in his chair, his legs crossed, waiting for the pathetic spectacle of an unrepresented defendant trying to string together a coherent legal argument against his masterpiece of lies. I did not walk to the wooden podium. Instead, I walked directly to the judge's elevated bench. "Miss Rogers, what are you doing?" the judge asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "You must present your case from the podium." I did not answer verbally. I unbuttoned my blazer and reached into my inside breast pocket. I did not pull out a character reference letter or a medical evaluation. I pulled out a heavy, solid black bronze badge encased in a leather wallet, along with a laminated, highly secure federal identification card. I placed them gently but firmly onto the polished wood of the judge's bench, right in front of her gavel. The judge leaned forward, visibly annoyed by the breach of protocol. She picked up the leather wallet. Her eyes scanned the bronze badge, then shifted to the identification card. I watched her entire demeanor change in the span of 2 seconds. The annoyance vanished entirely, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. Her posture went completely rigid. "What is the meaning of this?" she asked, her voice dropping to an involuntary, breathless whisper. "Read it into the public record, Your Honor," I replied, my voice calm, cold, and carrying perfectly across the silent room. "For the court reporter." The judge swallowed hard. She looked up at me, then down at the plaintiff's table, and finally addressed the room. "Let the record reflect," the judge began, her voice suddenly trembling slightly, "that the defendant, Melody Rogers, has just presented verified credentials identifying her as the lead forensic financial investigator for the Federal Bureau of Sovereign Financial Defense." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating vacuum that sucked the oxygen entirely out of the room. Then came the sound. A sharp metallic clatter echoed from the plaintiff's table. It was Marcus Thorne's expensive fountain pen slipping from his suddenly paralyzed fingers and bouncing violently off the hardwood floor. I slowly turned around to face them. Thorne was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, the arrogant smirk completely wiped from his face, replaced by a mask of dawning horror. Beside him, Harrison looked as if he had just been struck by a high-voltage electrical current. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent white. He tried to speak, his jaw working up and down, but he just made a pathetic, stammering noise. Beatrice froze entirely, her eyes darting frantically between me, her husband, and the judge, entirely unable to process the words she had just heard. They thought they had cornered a weak, defenseless sheep. They had just realized the sheep was holding the leash to a pack of hungry wolves. "Your Honor," I said, breaking the silence and taking total control of the room, "the defense calls Harrison Rogers back to the witness stand." Harrison did not move. He was glued to his chair, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. "Mr. Rogers," the judge commanded, her voice regaining its sharp, unforgiving authority, "return to the stand immediately." Thorne finally snapped out of his paralysis. He jumped to his feet, pure panic bleeding into his voice. "Objection, Your Honor. My client has already testified. This is highly irregular." "Overruled," the judge snapped without a single second of hesitation. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne. Mr. Rogers, take the stand right now, or I will have the bailiff drag you there and hold you in contempt of court." Harrison slowly stood. His legs visibly shook as he walked across the room and climbed back into the witness box. He looked at me not with his usual condescension, but with pure, unadulterated terror. I walked to the center of the room, opening my thin portfolio. I pulled out a stack of papers. They were not medical records. They were deeply classified banking ledgers. "Mr. Rogers," I began, my voice sharp and authoritative, adopting the exact tone I used in federal interrogation rooms to break hardened criminals. "Under oath, you just painted a picture of a highly successful businessman grieving a mother who lost her mind. Let us look at the real picture. Is it not true that your primary logistics company has been operating at a massive, unsustainable loss for the last 24 months? Harrison swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "I do not see what my business has to do with my mother's estate." "Answer the question," the judge barked, leaning over the bench. "We have had some difficult financial quarters," Harrison muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. I pulled out the first document and held it up for the room to see. Difficult quarters is a fascinating way to describe a $3.5 million deficit. Is it not true, Mr. Rogers, that 2 years ago, you illegally diverted millions of dollars in corporate funds into an unregistered cryptocurrency exchange managed by an Eastern European syndicate? "Objection! Relevance!" Thorne screamed, sweat now visibly soaking the collar of his custom shirt. "It goes directly to the plaintiff's true motive for filing this fraudulent lawsuit, Your Honor," I countered smoothly, not even looking at the lawyer. "Overruled. The witness will answer the question," the judge stated, completely captivated by the unraveling spectacle. Harrison remained entirely silent, his eyes darting toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom, as if contemplating a desperate, futile run for freedom. "I will save you the trouble of committing federal perjury a second time," I said, walking toward him and slapping a thick stack of bank statements directly onto the wooden ledge of the witness box. "These are certified, subpoenaed records from 3 shell companies you set up in the Cayman Islands. They show exactly how you lost $3.5 million. You are bankrupt, Mr. Rogers. Your company is days away from total collapse. And worse, the criminal syndicate you owe that money to is not known for its patience or its legal collection methods. A loud gasp echoed from the gallery. Beatrice covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute horror as the grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy lifestyle shattered in public. I turned my back on Harrison and faced the judge. My grandmother, Eleanor, did not suffer from dementia. She was sharper than anyone in this room. 3 months ago, while Harrison was desperately searching her house for antique items to pawn, he carelessly left his briefcase open. Eleanor found his alternate ledgers. She saw the massive debt. She knew exactly what he was doing. I paused, letting the crushing weight of the truth settle over the silent room. Eleanor changed her will entirely of her own volition, I continued, my voice echoing with undeniable certainty. She realized her own son was planning to use her $4.7 million estate not to honor her memory, but to plug a massive money laundering hole for an international criminal organization. She left the money to me because she knew I was the only person with the federal authority and the exact skills required to protect her legacy and tear his entire illegal operation to the ground. Thorne was out of his seat again, his voice cracking hysterically, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This is wild, baseless speculation. There is absolutely no proof of these highly defamatory claims." I turned slowly to face Marcus Thorne. The heavy iron gears of the trap were about to snap shut, severing bone and sinew. "I am so incredibly glad you mentioned proof, Counselor," I said, a dangerous chill lacing every single word. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted digital audio recorder. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. It is a legally obtained audio intercept, authorized by a federal warrant signed by a district court judge 3 weeks before my grandmother even passed away." Thorne's face turned the exact color of wet cement. He physically stumbled backward, the back of his knees hitting his own chair. "You cannot play that!" Thorne shouted, raw panic completely destroying his polished, theatrical facade. "Attorney-client privilege completely forbids the admission of any private, confidential conversations between me and my client." "Attorney-client privilege is immediately and permanently invalidated under the crime-fraud exception," I fired back, my voice cutting through his panic like a surgical scalpel. "If a lawyer and a client are actively discussing the commission of a felony, the privilege ceases to exist." The judge looked at the digital recorder in my hand, then at Thorne's utterly terrified face. "Play the recording, Investigator Rogers." I pressed the button and held the device close to the microphone on my desk. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. "We need that money, Marcus. If those Russians do not get their $3.5 million by the end of the month, I am a dead man." Harrison's recorded voice filled the room, sounding painfully desperate and shrill. "Calm down, Harrison." Thorne's slick, arrogant voice responded through the speakers, cementing his own doom. "The money is practically ours. I have a corrupt doctor on my payroll. We pay him $25,000 in cash, and he will write a certified psychiatric evaluation stating your mother has advanced Alzheimer's disease. We take that fake paper to civil court, invalidate the new will, and crush your pathetic accountant daughter. Once we get the $4.7 million, we route it through my firm's trust accounts in the Caymans. The debt gets washed, and I take my 20% fee." I clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was heavy, toxic, and absolutely devastating. I looked directly at Marcus Thorne. He looked exactly like a man standing on the gallows, watching the executioner reach for the lever. He realized in that agonizing, breathless second that he was not just losing a simple civil lawsuit. By actively conspiring to forge medical documents and committing perjury in a court of law to facilitate international money laundering, he had just guaranteed himself a one-way ticket to federal prison. The slick, untouchable lawyer was completely, irrevocably destroyed. But I was not quite finished. I turned back to the judge, letting the heavy silence stretch for a moment. "There is one final, critical detail, Your Honor," I said. "My grandmother was not just trying to protect her wealth from greedy relatives. She wanted to destroy the people threatening her. She did not leave me $4.7 million in liquid cash. 3 days before she died, she intentionally used the entirety of her estate to purchase a controlling interest of preferred stock in a very specific offshore financial institution. It is the exact same shell bank Mr. Thorne and Mr. Rogers currently use to launder their money. Thorne let out a choked, suffocating gasp. He understood instantly. By inheriting that stock, I continued, my voice steady and unyielding, I am now the majority shareholder of their illicit bank, which means I have the immediate, legal right to initiate a complete internal audit of the institution's ledgers. The money is not just gone. It is the absolute key to unlocking their entire criminal network. I already possess the routing numbers, the hidden offshore accounts, and the names of every single client involved in the syndicate. The judge did not hesitate for a single second. She picked up her heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down with a deafening crack that echoed like a gunshot. This fraudulent lawsuit is immediately dismissed with extreme prejudice, the judge declared, her voice booming with absolute authority. She reached for her pen. Furthermore, based on the undeniable evidence of federal crimes presented in this court today, I am signing emergency arrest warrants for Harrison Rogers and Marcus Thorne right now. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung violently open. A team of 6 armed federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the letters BSFD printed across their backs marched down the center aisle. I had positioned them outside the courtroom doors at 8 o'clock this morning, waiting for the perfect moment. Total chaos erupted. Beatrice began to scream hysterically, grabbing onto the wooden railing as the agents advanced on the table. Harrison collapsed completely. His legs gave out beneath him, and he fell heavily to the floor as a pair of cold steel handcuffs were ratcheted tightly around his wrists. He looked up at me from his knees, his expensive suit wrinkled, tears of pure terror streaming down his face. "Melody, please, you cannot do this. We are family." I walked over and looked down at the pathetic man kneeling on the floor. My expression remained completely blank and unforgiving. "You are a federal suspect," I stated coldly. "I am law enforcement. Do not claim you know me." Nearby, Thorne was violently shoved face first against the plaintiff's table, his arms wrenched roughly behind his back. His lucrative career was instantly over, his legal license was completely destroyed, and he was being dragged out alongside his client to face decades in a federal penitentiary. 1 month later, the dust had finally settled. The criminal syndicate was completely dismantled by my agency, and my parents were sitting in federal custody awaiting trial without the possibility of bail. The case was formally closed. I kept my grandmother's house in the quiet suburbs. It was a peaceful Sunday afternoon. I sat alone in her cozy living room, sipping a cup of hot chamomile tea, listening to the wind outside. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the antique brass pocket watch Eleanor and I had painstakingly restored together. I gently wound the delicate crown. The steady, rhythmic ticking filled the silent room, a beautiful heartbeat of brass and steel. A soft smile touched my lips. "They only saw the surface, Grandma," I whispered into the quiet air. "But we completely controlled the gears. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.